Thank you. Good morning. I was able to understand that. Entendí un poco, hablo español, soy inmigrante, so más bien portuñol. So thank you so much for the interpreters to be here. And my name is Ana Martina. I am a cooperative developer, and I am very happy to be here and to see all these folks, cooperators, on a Saturday. Very bright, sunny. I know that it's going to be raining later, but we're going to have a really wonderful day today. And I'm very honored also to be supporting the organizing with a lot of folks to be putting together all of these events, including Emmy, who is there in the back, who's doing a lot of work. And thank you, Emmy. So I'm going to be brief. I'm going to be introducing to Esteban Kelly, who is my colleague, who is here. And Esteban and I, we work 6 or 7 years together at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. I serve as the membership director. Esteban is the director of the federation. And it's been an honor to be working along with Esteban in cooperatives. I'm going to read the bio, but just you know, Esteban is one of the persons that is very involved in different aspects of cooperatives. He's been part of housing cooperatives, worker cooperatives, and he also has a lot of experience, not just on the national organizing with worker cooperatives, but also at the international level as part of the board of SICOPA. So I'm going to read the bio. Esteban Kelly is the executive director of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and is chair of the National Cooperative Business Association, the NCBA-CLUSA. He was a co-founder of AORTA, a worker cooperative whose consulting, facilitation, skill building, and political education enables co-ops and local and national organizations to be more effective and impactful. He was a co-founder and first board president of the cross-sector Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, and has also served on numerous boards, including the Democracy at Work Institute, the LCA Housing Cooperative, and Cooperative Development Foundation. In 2011, Esteban was introduced into NASCO's Cooperative Hall of Fame in recognition of his decade of leadership on the board and as their Director of Education and Training. The same year, he joined the board of NCBA-CLUSA. In 2018, Esteban won a Philadelphia Social Innovation Award for Public Policy. The same year, he helped get the Main Street Employee Ownership Act passed by Congress. Esteban served 2 terms as a mayoral appointee and briefly co-chair of the Philadelphia Food Policy Advisory Council. His appointment followed 8 years expanding food access in West Philly as a worker owner and co-op manager at Mariposa Food Co-op, when the grocery store was still democratically managed by a staff collective. He currently represents the U.S. on the board of the International Worker Cooperative Association known as SICOPA. We're going to have Esteban delivering his presentation, and then he's going to follow facilitating a panel. Thank you so much for being here, Esteban. It's a pleasure always.
Is this totally cringe, this thing? You sure? I feel really solemn. This is my first time doing one of these. I don't know if it's giving Care Bears or like Iron Man, maybe. Well, thank you for that warm introduction. I never know who people are talking about when my bio is being read. It's like, that's crazy. Did I really do it? It just sounds weird hearing it in the third person. Anyway, it is very good to be here with you today. I wanted to share a couple stories, and as part of that, maybe think through some strategy together. So I have some framing set up for us to do that, and then I'm going to be joined by folks from Maine, from New England. There was one person who wasn't able to make it for a family emergency, so but we're going to be fine. Okay, so the tentative, I suppose it's now final, title of my talk is Solution Machines. How we can catalyze co-ops in order to meet the moment. So we're going to talk about the moment. I know things can be a little bleak. We're not going to be all the way to the bleakness, but we have to engage with the world that we live in. And here's what I'm trying to do. I'm going to be very transparent about this. So there's no cheat code. If you're taking notes, these are my assumptions going into the talk. The first is that co-ops are common and that they're naturally occurring. I have a background in anthropology. Somehow that didn't make it into the bio. But I'm about to tell a story in just a moment about, even with all of my experience in cooperatives, how I ended up getting organized into one, unbeknownst to me, by people who are not co-op experts at all. So they're that common, and that they're used to solve human problems, collective problems, usually not individual problems, right? Secondly, that co-ops can be catalysts for solutions to all the different crises, any specific crisis, all the different crises we might face. So that's another kind of assumption I'm coming in with in this framework. And the third is actually about just the expansiveness of the Big Ten of the broad co-op world. Obviously nowadays, as Anna was sharing, I've been mostly focusing my work on worker ownership and worker co-ops. But in my, I just moved past 25 years now, so I'm old. In my more than 25 years of co-op organizing, I've touched all different co-op sectors, and that's part of what brought me to my role as the current board chair for the National Cooperative Business Association. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And through that, and through some of the journeys that cross-sector co-op leadership has taken me, I've seen how there isn't really any one particular ideology. I'm going to show you a picture of an autocrat in another part of the world speaking at a giant cooperative conference, and I'm in the audience there. So, for example, it's like that's how broad and expansive this can be. It is not ideologically about any one thing. It can be used, some might say co-opted, by all different kinds of people from different ideologies, but certainly the three different ideologies that I'm going to map out, I can see different pathways for, I shouldn't say different, distinct pathways for using a cooperative model from a range of different ideologies and still applying it earnestly and directly. And I'll get to it, but the point is not that one of them is the correct solution. It's that they're all viable, possible models. Okay, you with me so far? Yeah. Cool. So I want to tell you a story about a time I ended up in Hackney, which is a neighborhood in London. And it's sort of, I had never heard of it before, even though that's where my friend lived and was putting me up. So he said, yes, you're going to land at Gatwick Airport, and just, the tube does not reach all the way down there. You're going to make your way to Hackney. Hackney is sort of like Brooklyn vibes, certain neighborhoods of Brooklyn for people who've been there. And Gatwick Airport, it would almost be like going to maybe like Logan Airport from here. Like it's like quite far. There's ways to get there. There's like a series of buses. So what had happened was I was in June of 2022. I was at, I think my second General Assembly for the International Cooperative Alliance. And I'll introduce that character because it's going to come up later anyway. So this is the non-governmental organization that represents all members of credit unions and cooperatives of all kinds, whether they're getting their electricity there, or it's housing, or it's farming, certainly worker co-ops, all different members of co-ops all around the world are directly or indirectly members of this organization. And so there's kind of like United Nations of co-ops. So they were having their General Assembly. They do this every 2 years, I think. And this was the first one that they were doing fully in person again in the aftermath of, or the arrival of COVID. So I flew to Sevilla. It was my first time leaving the country after after getting vaccinated and all that. And I was at that event. And it was cool to meet people from all over the world who were really grappling with these questions. How are we using the cooperative model to address the different problems of our time? And reason, I don't even remember the reasons why, but I was going to London afterwards. Cool, so I got a flight from Seville to London. I was landing at like 1 in the morning, which is not ideal. So this is where it gets interesting. There was, in June of 2022, a massive, I think one of the biggest in modern times, massive transit strike that hit England. Okay, what do I do now? It's doing lots of people. Should I grab the other one? Okay, no more Iron Man. All right. Resilience, you see that? So I landed in the middle of the night, and I did not have a data plan. That was also an issue, so I couldn't really communicate with my host. Tube was shut down, buses were shut down, regional rail was shut down. There was no transportation happening. And I was like, support the strike. But also, I was abandoned a couple hours away from London, from Hackney. And also did not have a data plan. Okay, so lines are queuing up and they're going like all throughout the airport, outside the airport. I mean, there is a taxi line that is like 4 hours long. And they're doing this like price gouging thing, where they're like, well, we can charge people like $300 to get from Gatwick Airport into London. So I find myself in one of these lines, and it's very long. And guy to the, where are we, to my left, to our left, if we're looking at this picture. He starts going up and down the line. He's like, all right, you guys, this is a long line. This is an expensive cab. Who wants to go in on a cab with me? We're gonna form a little co-op. And I was the first. I was like, 100%. Are you kidding? Like this is. I also was like, how am I gonna afford something 4 times the price of my plane ticket just to get from the airport I landed in into London? So I was like, totally. Even if it's just the 2 of us, I've just saved myself 50% of this fare. To his advantage, I was further up in the line. So he's like, great. I was like, I'm gonna hold the place in line. You can go recruit other members of our co-op. So I think next he found the guy to the right. Turns out the guy to the right was a union organizer. He does the union bargaining on behalf of unions. He was very quiet about this during this because we're all in the airport and everyone was just like, I mean, the swear words you could imagine. Very colorful on that island. But they were all cursing the unions, and we're like, we're kind of like in support. And then so we had 3 of us with the driver. You could fit a 4th person. We do finally, and we're trying to talk it up without annoying people. To be like, okay, like we're forming a co-op. Like anyone else want to get in on this? We find this guy, tall dude. Turns out he was flying back from Dubai and does just heinous work. Logistics related to like everything destroying our planet. But he was our 4th person, so we were like, okay, and he was pretty close to the front. I mean, he was like number 12 or 15. Like we still had to wait for a while, but so we skipped the line. We had him. He seemed a little tentative, but we were like, yeah, this is gonna be. We're all going to London. And so we got a cab eventually. We're in a long, which it could be, it was awkward no matter what, but it could have been like a quietly awkward ride. Moneybags was in the front on the other side, because they drive on the other side. And he was tall, so it just kind of made sense. We're like, yeah, no, we're fine, we'll be in the back, 3 of us, while we're coming. And so we're like, again, at this point, it's literally 3 o'clock in the morning. We're like, so what do you do? Union guy's like, you first, I'm not saying what I do. So this guy's a graphic designer. He's telling us stories about how his brother plays professional soccer in South Africa. He goes down there to go surfing and all this stuff. It's like, okay. I start sharing a little bit about what I do. The irony, went completely over their heads that I organized cooperatives and that's what had just happened, and I did not instigate it at all. We get to the union guy. He's not clear about what side he's on. He's like, oh, I do negotiations stuff related to labor sometimes. He came clean later on, and then we heard about the oil pipeline logistics tanker guy. And so we land. The taxi driver was like, "I'm not a bus. I'm not doing 4 different drop-offs. Like we negotiated one rate." He's like, "You get max 2. I will maybe drop you off at 2 places." So we were like, "Okay, well, the Rugrats we're gonna have our own drop-off in Hackney, and then they'll go further on for the corporate guy to get to his spot." So we're getting out at our stop. The money bags guy's like, "Actually, don't worry about it, I've got this covered." And we were like, "Really? That's so kind of you." He's like, "I'm literally expensing it." And we're like, "That's still so kind of you, you sure? I did not say any of those things. I just grabbed my bag and went out to the sidewalk. And so then we were like, okay, we just had this really intense experience. We have formed bonds, and we were about to all go our separate ways. I needed some coaching on how to take the bus because my phone was not working, I didn't have data. So I think Kevin rode the bus with me because I was going in the same direction anyway. And then the other guy ran into a pub. He's like, "I'm famished, I gotta go eat something." We're like, okay. He goes in, he grabs a bite. While we're waiting for the bus, we're still out there. He comes outside and we're like, "Oh, what's up?" He's like, "I just felt like, isn't this a thing? Like, this is a thing." So at which point I was like, all right, look, my phone doesn't work, but we are gonna take a selfie. Because this is a moment to remember. So this is us on a street corner at 3:30 in the morning in Hackney. And I think it demonstrates, reason I'm telling the story, how common the opportunities are to seize cooperative models and structures, even if we didn't have bylaws incorporated and we didn't have to figure out our shares. Although we did have a whole conversation about how much are we putting in to split this cat, so there is that. But that we were all able to understand, including people who didn't know I was coming from the General Assembly for the International Cooperative Alliance, they were all able to understand, thank you, the merits of cooperatives and co-op solutions. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna keep going. Oh yes, this is just about kind of the universality of co-ops. I was at a co-op conference, an international one, and I don't remember whose merch I was thumbing through. It looks like a zine or something, but I was like, this is so cool. And I grabbed a picture, no context in my phone, and as I was preparing for this, I was like, this is a really cool artifact. And it really is trying to encapsulate, you can tell this was not written by an American, by the spelling of the word color, but it really encapsulates that regardless of, that co-ops are for everybody. And it kind of doesn't matter, the benefits are on the outside of this lifesaver looking thing, but it doesn't matter your religion, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter your color, your creed, whatever, any of those things, that we're here getting proper working conditions for all employees, which is why REI should not be union busting. We're here doing clean, wholesome shops, all of the different things, and then returning the profits to the members. So this whole thing about, makes for solidarity, I like that. Okay, so if my argument is that co-ops can be a catalyst for the problems of our time, I wanted to back up to high school chemistry. It's so fitting that we're in high school. And remind us what a catalyst is. Because sometimes we throw that word out there, we're like, yeah, catalyst. We're gonna be catalyst. What does it even mean? So, catalyst is a substance that accelerates or facilitates a chemical reaction. Oh yeah. There's a chemical reaction that was gonna happen anyway, or could happen slowly over time. But you throw a catalyst in there, and without changing anything fundamental about the chemistry of before and after, it accelerates that reaction. It happens much faster.
it unlocks things. So it acts as a push to make the reaction occur more quickly or under more favorable conditions. The catalyst provides an alternative pathway for molecules to bond or break apart, lowering the okay, we're getting into real chemistry stuff. But here we go. It serves as a facilitator. You guys, I'm a facilitator. It serves as a facilitator that helps the chemical reaction proceed more efficiently. Once the reaction is complete, the catalyst still exists and can be used again in future reactions. I think that in addition to solving problems of all kinds, cooperatives can accelerate the problem solving that people are so desperately trying to do, politically, economically, ecologically, socially, in terms of public health, everything, right? That if we can lean into cooperative models and structures, if we can expand, if we can take up more space, I think that those efforts to solve global, local, regional problems can happen faster. So it's important we know what a catalyst is. Okay, I want to talk about polycrisis. So polycrisis, and that's not about being overwhelmed by having multiple lovers. That's maybe a different thing. Polycrisis is a term, and I'm going to read the actual definition, if you will. A term originally coined by French philosopher, I only learned where this came from a few days ago when I was preparing for this part. A term originally coined by French philosopher and sociologist Edgar Morin in a book he wrote in 1993. And it describes a complex situation where multiple interconnected crises converge and then also amplify each other, resulting in a predicament that is difficult to manage or resolve. So unlike a single crisis that may have clear causes and solutions, a polycrisis involves overlapping and interdependent issues, making it a more pervasive and enduring state of instability. It's a bummer. And we're in the bummer section of my remarks. So there's many things that we could personally or objectively recognize as a crisis. I'm not going to insist that there's any particular one that matters most to you, but I am going to ask everyone to take a moment, and this is silent, I'm not going to ask you to share with the class, to just think about, to contemplate one. You can pick one, any one. Any one crisis. It might relate to the big macro polycrisis. But you can think about, is there one that worries you most, or the least? Something that feels like a safe crisis to think through? Is it one that feels most personal to your daily life or your family, but might be similar in how it affects other families that are like yours? Is it one that feels immense in its far-reaching scope of impacting millions or billions of lives worldwide? Or one that might especially affect most of the 1.4 million residents of Maine? Think about it. Okay, once you have your crisis, really focus it on one word, one term or phrase, and focus it on one essential aspect of it. Okay, now let's come back to co-ops. I'm claiming that they're solution machines. And that's something that I got from a mentor of mine who, I think she comes from the food co-op sector. And I think she actually got it from a mentor of hers, so I might be misquoting Karen's implement, but she calls co-ops solution machines. That's what they're built to do, solve solutions. They happen to be human-centered solution machines that are rooted in a set of values. Okay, so you've got your chosen crisis, we've got a whole collective solution, co-ops, and but that's pretty general. So what are some of the ways that co-ops can specifically be leveraged to a predicament or a crisis? And maybe this will help us. It doesn't matter if your word is up here. I just grabbed a word cloud of polycrisis. If it helps to anchor, or if you struggled to come up with one, you can link cheat and pick one. Sure. So I want us to think about how co-ops can be a mechanism for addressing some aspect of your crisis, specifically. Oh, I'm going to say a thing about how a friend of mine, his name's Malcolm, he wrote a book recently, it just came out this month, and he is a smarty pants who's been on, this is his 4th book, and the other ones have been some award-winning LA Times, yada yada. So my friend Malcolm Harris, he wrote a book called What's Left? 3 Paths Through the Crisis. His book is about a specific crisis. I will not spoil which one because it doesn't matter. But he used a framework that I think is helpful for us. And he said that there are, I'm going to come back to the framework actually. I want to first zoom out to remembering that if co-ops are a solution, that's why, okay, I'm like, that's why we got to IYC. So, the United Nations last year, in anticipation of 2025, was like, oh cool, we're living through a poly crisis. We think co-ops are a solution to all kinds of things that people need, and that help us be more resilient to the different shocks that are coming our way. And so they voted for the 2nd time in my lifetime to designate a whole year as an international year for cooperatives, under the idea that cooperatives build a better world. Cooperatives build a better world. Yes, there's a banner out in the hallway that says it too. Thank you, Kathy, if you're the one who brought it. And so I got a chance to go to the soft launch. I grew up in New York. I live in Philadelphia. I had never been to the United Nations, even though I grew up in New York. And so I was there for their, they had this, kind of one of these like smaller breakout rooms, medium-sized breakout rooms. Global cooperative leaders from all over the world came to New York. I'm here with my friend Eric, who started a ride-hailing drivers co-op app. And we had this launch. You will recognize this guy on his phone over here. I put him in the corner in the blue suit. That's me, that's what the joke was. I'm also over there. So we have this person in the middle, Samel, she's the United Nations kind of designee who focuses on cooperatives. Did you know we had one? That's cool. And then she also interfaces with the ILO, the International Labor Organization, which is kind of the labor wing of United Nations. So she was there too. Everyone shared remarks about how cooperatives can be useful solutions, machines for all the different things, and then what does that mean for the kind of agenda we're trying to create. So that brought us to the conference and General Assembly that the International Cooperative Alliance had in New Delhi, which Kathy was also there for that. And so Kathy and I and a whole delegation of US-based co-op leaders, we got to go to Delhi, this was 6 months ago, this was end of November, Thanksgiving week. Wherever you were during Thanksgiving, this is where we were. Kathy and I, along with thousands of people, we were in the audience when the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, got up there and talked about how cooperatives were important for him and for his life and his community, lifting poor and working people out of poverty, literally transforming rural society through agriculture. So he shared an impassioned story about that, and then what kind of partnership he wants government to have with cooperatives. I didn't realize this, but in his first term, 2017, he created India's first ministry for cooperatives. So they have like the equivalent of like a US department. Instead of a Department of Agriculture that has a program supporting co-ops, they were like, nope, this is its own thing that needs to exist. And that was pretty cool. So we were there for the real launch, including, they somehow let me on stage to share my thoughts about some of this stuff and challenges. And then this is me with the Secretary General and I think Communications Director for the International Worker Co-op Alliance. So we were there to support all of this. Okay, now we're getting back to Malcolm's book. Sorry for going out of order. He has a framework. It is 3 things. They are completely opposing ideologies, but also give them room to cook, you know? So the first one is market craft. The idea that take the world as it is, maybe we don't have energy, maybe we don't care, maybe we're comfortable with the political economic systems the way they're currently set up. Take the world as it is, how can we tap into markets as they currently are to address your crisis? What I want to think about is how, in the world that exists right now, can we create conditions to expand cooperative infrastructure, to make it more possible that our catalytic, our solution machines can reach everywhere they need to reach, because our problems are everywhere. They're deep, they're very local, they're also everywhere. So how can we use markets to do that? What opportunities do we have to make change within the status quo systems as they currently are? Example I can think of is, we have a lot of conversations, including with people like Rob Brown in the room from CDI, about how, well, a lot of what we need in cooperative development is capital. So we're not talking about a political economic revolution. We're just like, hey, there's a lot of capital sloshing around in our existing system. How can we get more of it into your bank accounts and your pocketbooks and your projects? Can we remove some of the red tape and limitations around how we access it? Can we set up our own local, regional loan funds? Can we experiment with ideas of non-extractive finance, even without completely upending or challenging the system as it currently exists? So those kinds of things, right? We can work in the market to like set up your own trust or your own community development financial institution, or to expand one that already exists. I bet some of them are tabling out in the hallway, right? So that's all within our current system. I think also about technical assistance. You know, how can we, even just using a fee-for-service model for technical assistance, like that's an example of, I ran a co-op or I was part of a co-op, I started a co-op. For 15 years I just left, called Aorta. And that's part of what we did. We started a business that existed in the market as it is, and we offered support, organizational development, facilitation, skill building. I've facilitated retreats for many of you in the room, as a matter of fact, and your boards, about just on a fee-for-service basis, how do we expand movements that we believe in, including cooperative organizations. So that's working within the existing market, for example. So there's all kinds of things that we can do with the market as it is, carve out a way to be competitive. Even that picture of my friend Eric and I in front of the United Nations building, that was him coming up with a solution within the existing market to say Uber and Lyft might have a monopoly, but what if we can carve out a little bit of space and capture just 20% of the local ride-sharing market, which is something that they've been successful at doing every place that they've launched the drivers co-op, different affiliates of the drivers co-op. They're able to pretty quickly recruit about 20% of the workforce. Okay, the second one is public power. The example my friend Malcolm gave in his book was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which I'm not going to get into. But it's the idea of linking in with the apparatus, speaking of infrastructure, of the state, government, other institutions, could be universities, could be think tanks, but how do you plug into these existing large institutions to do a set of projects at scale? He calls it socialism. And leverage those institutions for the kind of change that you're trying to make. So I think for co-ops that might be some of the efforts around creating public banks, right? This idea that North Dakota has one, they're trying to set them up in places like LA, in Philadelphia. There's like legislation that really has legs in a lot of parts of the US. But why is we as deposit holders, we've got two options, right? You stick it in a credit union, and then they're regulated to the gills. And right now, actually, the big banks are lobbying the Trump-Musk administration to basically gut some of the things that protect credit unions, because the big banks are like, now's our chance. So there's a whole campaign, don't tax my credit union. You can look into it if you're here from the credit union side. So you've got credit unions, but they're overly regulated. They can't really finance large projects. They can finance your car, maybe. They can maybe help you get a small business started, but larger loans, they're regulated out from doing that. And otherwise, we're left with the oligarchic bank conglomerates. So what do we do when you've got pension funds from whole groups of teachers? Where are they supposed to put their deposits? They don't really have any option other than sticking it with Wells Fargo. That's a problem. So the idea of public banking is to set up institutions that are literally a bank. They can have an oversight board, yada yada, and we, the deposit holders, community-based organizations, corporate ones, anyone can use it, can stick their money in there, but then we have some sort of democratic mechanism, oversight, and say about the social purpose of that public bank. They should be there funding cooperative projects, high-speed rails, so you can get to Logan faster if you need to, get that direct flight. Those kinds of projects. The problem with the public power model, and I agree with Malcolm in his book about this, is that it's very sweeping. It's like, here is this big thing, and you lose the local nuance. He gives an example of an island in Hawaii. Kauai is the island, on which they were setting up a project to be 100% renewable. They're like, this fossil fuel thing is destroying our local economy. Why are we importing? We have all this sun and wind and all these things. And so they had this big project to set up this large battery, basically. It was going to involve water systems and a bunch of land use. And they were like, this is a great thing. It's going to make us energy independent. And it had to come before the courts through indigenous groups who said, hey, you're overlooking some stuff here. This is going to destroy a bunch of important agricultural land, sacred lands. The water use thing is actually going to pollute our water system. They're like, we agree with the goal. We also want to be using renewables, but you're moving too fast with this big sweeping plan. You did not consult, you did not slow down enough to democratically really consult the community. And so here's all these different problems that are going to happen downstream. And that was the tool they had, was to pump the brakes. They ended up, in the end, winning that case, stopping the project, going back to the table, and designing something that made more sense and was effective. And everyone was like, cool, we can collaborate and do this. But that's the problem when things are very high level, one big solution. It's one of my critiques of things like the United Nations. They're not going to get it right in Maine, right? Okay, the last one, Commonwealth. So I think about this as certainly indigenous, that perspective of being local enough and rooted enough to understand the dynamics of hydrology and ecology and seasons and what's the impact of the tourists that come down from, that used to come down from Canada, right? That's the kind of thing that you're going to have a sense of because you're Mainers. And a policy from Washington is not going to understand that, nor is a democratic socialist from Los Angeles, right? So, Commonwealth being rooted in local knowledge and building models and solutions that are about our shared resources and stewarding that. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because, oh, you know what? I wanted to give one quick example that maybe threads all three, because my point is that none of these are disposable, none of them are wrong. We need to try everything. There's space for all of our solutions. And I was talking with somebody about, in Rhode Island, friends of mine ran a successful campaign to legalize cannabis. And in it, they knew just enough about cooperatives to be dangerous, and so they added a provision in there to say not only are we going to have some of the jobs that we're creating designated for formerly incarcerated people, so that people who've been justice impacted by with marijuana convictions can now be employed now that we have decriminalized and in fact legalized this industry. So in addition to that, they also said, yeah, and cooperatives are one of the forms that these licenses should be eligible for, which was something they learned from Massachusetts and New York. And then they went a step further and they said, no, there's only so many permits that are going to be out there. So we're going to designate in the law that a handful of these permits can only go to worker-owned cooperatives. So we're not going to throw ourselves and say, well, we're also eligible alongside all of these large capitalist businesses that are going to outcompete us, and they can muster the capital and technical assistance and all the things. We know how long it takes to create co-ops. So if there are more useful solutions to root that wealth locally, to create good jobs for people who are justice impacted, to also practice sustainable agriculture, right? Then we need space for the model to work. So they did all of that work. That is an opportunity that is looking at the market as it is. It is also engaging with the state, which sometimes can be like a large or slow solution. But then also really being rooted in some of the systems that we've created around cooperative, like local co-op organizing, and like linking with what is our Union Co-ops initiative down there? The United Food and Commercial Workers, working with Seed Commons and other groups to support cooperative businesses. So that's an example that brings all of them together. Okay, was also going to make an offhanded comment about how this generally relates to, it's a different framework, but it does relate to the general theory of change that the Worker Co-op Federation has, that it's a little bit of a remix of it. But it's like on the top, hey, we need infrastructure. This is this like technical piece that we need to build. So a lot of our strategy is around building out infrastructure, offering quality jobs, expanding things like our worker benefits program, and making sure that there's information, capital, resources are interpreted into different languages, all of that, right? And then when we have these jobs and workplaces, it's iterative, obviously, we're able to build up a community, spaces like this, like everything we're doing today and this weekend, to come together to build up leadership, to share skills and stories. You might be doing a build and design co-op in Martha's Vineyard, and we might have one in Philadelphia. A local organizer is not necessarily going to be able to connect those dots, but we exist at the Federation at that larger level to say, well, you guys are actually doing similar things in different places. Let's talk about how the tariffs on lumber are going to impact your business. Let's talk about what kind of policies we need. Okay. So social stuff, getting people together into communities of practice is the technical word, and building analysis and power together about what direction do we need to go for policy changes and business opportunities, etc. And then connecting up with other movements. It's very hard to see in this slide, but that says movements. That's a political one, not the technical or social one. But the ways that the things that we are experimenting with and learning and figuring out inside of movements can be beacons for other people around the world. That's what the United Nations saw in elevating co-ops as models. And I think that's true for other kinds of movements for economic justice and people's rights. Oh yes, and then last week I went to the United Nations again. And this time I was invited to speak on behalf of the ICA, because the UN was doing a summit on social development. I think they're having their second summit on social development. It's going to be in Doha, in Qatar. And they released a paper and a framework and said, okay, public, give us your comments and feedback about this. And so the ICA, which again represents 200 million cooperative enterprises and credit unions around the world, is one of, if not the largest NGO by that metric, that we represent 1.2 billion members of co-ops and credit unions all over the world. And they invited me to be the one to speak. They were like, hey Esteban, we can't get to New York, can you do this? I was like, sure. I've been there before. So I went to the United Nations, and there with Giuseppe, who's on the Sicopa board with me from Italy. He was there on vacation with his wife, and he was like, sorry, we got to do our remarks in English. I think it's got to be you. I was like, I will accept that honor. So I just sort of mapped out the real case that co-ops aren't just an idea, that we have centuries-long proven track record for delivering the goods and addressing people's needs in a lot of different ways. Okay, for polycrisis. So, we're getting toward the last part of my remarks here. So I think it's time for our call to action. There's a lot that we can do, and one of the problems with cooperatives is you might decide that it's one big co-op, you might decide that it's a small one, but at a certain point, the co-op's rules and bylaws kind of end at the co-op. There's this value, this principle of cooperating among co-ops. You might have heard of it. It's the 6 co-op principle. Did you know that that's what this conference is named after? Okay. But the reason that principle matters to elevate is because there is nothing else inherent in the co-op that says, by the way, you have to connect with other co-ops. You have to go beyond the merits of experiencing the benefits of anything from my little, taxi co-op in London to large purchasing co-ops for HVAC systems or whatever. That if you're successful, you got to help the other ones. If you figured something out, share the information instead of that being proprietary and private. But I think about it as what is only possible for us to do by coming together. So we can't build a cooperative economy by just doing co-ops inside your co-op. So this is my kind of pitch, that now is the moment for co-ops to vigorously advocate for policies that support community capacity to develop and to grow themselves. That's part of how we get through the poly crisis. I wanted to do a quick mapping moment, thinking about your own, your colleagues inside your co-op, whether they're here or not. Actually, it's helpful to get a sense of who's in the room in terms of who is a member of any type of credit union or co-op, just by show of hands. Okay, you're among the 1.2 billion people. Cool, good, nice to see. So who's a member of more than one co-op? Also helpful. I think the 1.2 billion double counts a few of us. And who does business with a co-op that they don't own? So this might be that you work in a nonprofit, you might do transactions with a co-op supplier. Helpful to see, cool. And then who is, maybe if you identify as an advocate or a supporter of co-ops, even if you're not a direct member of one. So you might support it, you might be, okay, I saw a couple hands. Yeah, great. That's helpful. When I'm thinking about my call to action, this is not about just, it's wonderful that you happened to get into the room. This is thinking about everyone in your co-op or your co-op ecosystem. Because the challenge is not, I think we over-personalize things in our culture. That if I say, go and follow us on social media, and you're like, I don't even do smart things. Phones, tablets, I do smart things. But you're like, but Rebecca, that's her whole jam. Great. So if that's the call to action, your task is to make sure that Rebecca gets all of the things on the social media accounts and is following them and passing the information along. Okay, so what are we doing? First, we gotta stay informed. It's 3 things. First, we gotta stay informed. So follow co-op accounts and newsletters. There's 2 easy ways to get started. One, who are your neighbors? What's regional for you, right? So you've got Cooperative Development Institute, you've got SIMBA, right? Cooperative Maine Business Alliance. There's things happening here, right? A lot of things happening here in the region. So that's an easy one. You start by thinking, well, what's around? It's helpful to stay informed with people who are paying attention to what's happening legislatively, what's happening economically, what's happening in terms of taxation in your region. Follow those accounts, those newsletters, those whatevers. Pay attention. subscribing to the newsletter, and I know this because I'm one of these people, is not enough if you don't read it. So get Rebecca in your co-op, who is going to read it, to also follow and be like, in your weekly staff meeting or whatever, be like, hey, here's like my big takeaway of like something that I saw in e-news. Okay, the other one is industry-based. So it might not be sector, industry, whatever. So it might not be Maine, it might not be New England, but who else is doing, grocery food co-ops? Follow that, if that's what you're doing. Who else is doing housing co-ops? Okay, it might be the Rocks, it might be a broader movement around land trusts and other housing, right? So what are those things? Follow them. Certainly, the work that I'm doing, I see as more, I think we do a pretty good job at following news, following trends, filtering out a bunch of BS and making sure that you find the information that you actually need to know. So you should follow the US Federation of Worker Co-ops, even if you're not in a worker co-op, just because like we do a pretty good job. And also National Cooperative Business Association, the like bulletins I've been hearing about everything happening from the new administration have been really important for knowing what's coming, because they're trying to defund everything, including co-ops, which is bad. Okay, bake education into your systems. I just mentioned an example of that. You're in your board meeting, your staff meeting, and someone's like, here's a thing that I know because I read the newsletter, or because I followed this thing on Blue Sky or Instagram. Great, or because I went to the P6 conference. Share the information. Pay attention, share the information, find out systems to do that. Do you have rituals and routines for sharing updates with your community? It doesn't need to be meetings. It could be over a potluck. It could be that, if you're out doing agriculture or something, or if you're installing solar panels, if there's a moment during your coffee break where you're like, oh yeah, it's time to do a type 5, where we just like share our announcements and updates. Whatever your thing is, find a way to bake it in, all right? Yeah, share information, look out for calls to action. That's the first. You with me so far? Because we got 2 hours. Okay. I was giving an example of like information. This was like stuff from the last year or so from the Worker Co-op Federation. Like, how else would you know that Co-op Cincy was awarded $500,000 from federal grant to bolster clean energy jobs in the greater Cincinnati area? That's cool! It might even be solving some of the crises that you thought of. That's based on advocacy and work that we did with our coalition and our partners. How else would you know that the New York City Worker Co-op Business Development Initiative received almost $4 million for its, I think they're now on their 10th year. That's cool. That trickle-down funding is currently deeply threatened. Deeply threatened, by the way. It's why you need to stay connected. I wouldn't be belaboring this otherwise, because we need our collective power. How else would you know? Colorado Program Awards, $63,000 in grants resulting in 21 employee ownership conversions. That's cool. Or that Washington State passed sweeping employee ownership initiative, including revolving loan fund and a tax credit. They, as part of this, created what is now, it's always a different state, the gold standard of the best worker co-op statute in the country is now Washington. Can you beat them? Yeah, let's try. Okay, second, join up and connect. So this is about membership. I think we have been a little bit corrupted by this like neoliberal individual mindset of like, what do I get for like my $10 in dues, where it's like transactional, when it's like, we have a whole world to win back and to build and to save. We can only do that by coming together. The cost of a cup of coffee, that's like what we're talking about. Donations of like $5 a month, you can do that. Not every business is like always solvent. I know some of them are small, some of them are startups, some of them are, I've done this. I've been part of dozens and dozens of co-ops, I know. But I also know that when you invest those things, not just thinking transactionally, although any co-op organization worth its salt is delivering you value, believe me, they have to because of governance and hearing from members all the time, so they have to. But because there's something that your contribution does that is 10x, it is outsized what it is doing just hanging out in your pocket or going to the ice cream truck or something. So we gotta come together. It's the only way that we can build power. Tapping into membership associations, same model. Let's go regional, let's go local, let's go sectoral, let's go industry-based, and then see who is doing powerful things that resonate with what you want to see. If that is the National Cooperative Business Association, great. Most of you are probably not members. I think NCBA has still maybe under 800 members. It's really not enough. And we just lost, I'm switching my Wii's. This is my board chair Wii. We just lost 90% of our funding because of Doge, Musk, just all slashed. Tens of millions of dollars, gone, 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 gone. This thing will not exist anymore if it's not propped up by our members. So see what you can do. Find out ncba.co about joining. I think they're doing some weird half dues program to ease the way of people joining. But also, Worker Co-Federation and other organizations. And then if you're not in a co-op, or if you're not a decider, because I know that that's a thing, especially for the consumer co-ops. You're like, this is all well and good. I feel inspired. I'm not our CFO. I'm not our board chair, right? So if you're not one, first of all, you can make that appeal, you can have that conversation, submit that proposal, but you can also become a sustaining donor. I think NCBA is just launching a new sustaining donor program. I don't even remember the name of it because I just heard about it yesterday, but it's live. And we have one at the Worker Co-op Federation as well. It's right on our landing page. What becomes possible when we come together in those ways? We can get things done collectively. We feel more powerful when we come together than we could alone. This is a bunch of, actually some of these are my board members from back then, the Worker Co-op Federation. But these are a lot of local cooperators at a rally that we set up, following or maybe preceding testimony that we gave around supporting and advancing co-ops of all kinds. So it's a cross-sector effort through an organization I co-founded called the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance as intentionally a cross-sector effort. So in addition to education and all the social stuff, leadership development, we do advocacy. One of the first things that we did when we were getting the effort off the ground was we marched into our congressional, at the time, he's now been prosecuted and locked up, but at the time, our congressman, we marched into his district office, which was maybe a mile from my house, and we were like, do you know about cooperatives? He's like, I mean, maybe I've heard of them, and we were like, well, let's tell you about them. And then we just gave him the whole rundown, including just in his district, about the food co-ops, the housing co-ops, the worker co-ops, the energy co-op. I mean, it was all these groups that were in there, the credit unions. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's like, if co-ops are so awesome, what would you need to catalyze this? Fast forward, he ended up crafting what was it initially called? It was basically the first legislation related to advancing co-ops in the century. It just hadn't been on the radar. There have been appropriations bills of can you keep funding this old thing from the 70s or 90s or whatever. But that's where that got, just from us coming together with no budget, forming an organization, building up our membership. How inspiring is this rally? Oh yeah, and then fast forward a couple years later, and this is me with Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez from the Small Business Committee and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand at a worker co-op in Brooklyn where they were announcing, it was a press release or something for the worker co-op, the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. So all those things become possible. It had to start somewhere. That was truly my first time hanging with a senator. Okay, lastly, joining up and affiliating. So connect your neighbors to co-op institutions. Are there other co-ops in your neighborhood? Are there other groups who do business with or support cooperatives in different ways? How do we make those connections more dense? That is not a personal, again, that individualized culture. It's not a personal choice to just join a co-op. It's the thing you should be evangelizing about. That if we build the community the way that a lot of faith-based organizing works, right? It's yeah, bring them over to the potluck. Let's sing and be joyous together. So be loud about joining, talk about it. And really, at a certain point, like, you're the only neighbor to your neighbor. You're the one who's gonna get other credit unions or cooperatives, or co-ops who don't act all that co-op-y. We all know some of them. How do we get them to act a little more co-op-y? Maybe they start by just like sponsoring the 5K or whatever, right? Do I have an example of this? Joining, oh, this is just some of the things. So like, for example, and this is speaking from my expertise from my own organization, and some of the stuff that we do, it ranges from leadership development and that connection, that community building, all that networking that takes organizing, to direct worker benefits that save people money on the cost of doing business, saves them money on the benefits of their jobs, right? We do like a dental program, vision program, pet insurance, like all that stuff, right? Cover their kids through the programs. We do technical assistance, obviously government relations and advocacy. You just saw me globetrot. Some of that is involved. And then also this thing about like telling our story and amplifying it so that people aren't like, have you heard of social enterprises? Or like, all of this stuff comes from co-ops. We are being co-opted all the time and watered down. So these are important things that we can do directly by coming together. Okay, in closing, by the way, solution machines. It only occurred to me while I was finalizing the slides, this little guitar. You all familiar with Woody Guthrie? So he has this guitar, and he played it, but it also had written on it, "This machine kills fascists." And it was, I had already developed this whole motif for these slides, and then I was like, oh, here we are talking about solution machines to all kinds of problems, including authoritarianism and fascism and everything, ecological collapse, whatever. Sorry, I didn't mean to snatch whatever your crisis was. Those are some. And what I'm talking about is like, just like Woody Guthrie's guitar, co-ops are machines that can kill fascism and authoritarianism. That they are about, they're about us coming together. Okay, so this is the home stretch of the last couple of slides. I'm just gonna do a very obnoxious thing and read a couple very short quotes from moments where I had done some thinking and writing, which is rare. This is from a piece that I wrote that was looking at future possibilities, but it was a couple years ago, and now we're living in the worst part of the future that we foresaw. And it says, the choices that we make over the coming years will be critical to either hampering or catalyzing a democratic transition rooted in worker and community ownership and control. A strategic, resilient, resourced, and supported network of leaders, institutions, and infrastructure might, over the next decade or so, create fertile soil for such transformations to take root and ultimately flourish. You can find that piece in Nonprofit Quarterly. A thing about how we win. So this came out of a piece that I co-wrote with our Senior Director of Government Relations, Mo Manglang. And we mapped out a couple of things. Here's how we win. We win by leveraging the relationships that we built over decades and the solid groundwork laid to make a compelling case for co-ops of all kinds. We were talking about worker-owned co-ops because that's my job. We win by staying connected to the grassroots and to each other. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. I think Maine is a really great example of what it looks like to cast aside ideology and just put your shoulder to the wheel to do stuff with your neighbors and build beautiful community along the way and have the economic impact along with it. I feel like we all belong. Okay, we win by being of service to intersectional movements and not just to ourselves. By being present throughout government processes, and that means if they're going to have a thing in City Hall or whatever, like just being present, knowing that if they're doing their budgeting cycle for the state, if you're present, then maybe cooperative things can be addressed. Not always because it's like, and now we're going to talk about co-ops. It's like, no, now we're going to talk about ag policy. Now we're going to talk about taxation policy. Now we're going to talk about small business services. These are all things that affect cooperatives, right? So being present through the process. And we win by building leadership and support pipelines. Okay, so lastly, I was invited to write the afterword for a book called Beyond Racial Capitalism. And it's really cool case studies of co-ops throughout the African diaspora, including in like Canada, and it's all over the world. It's really cool. So here I said, the more that movements concerned with justice hear directly from co-op leaders, the cooperative sector can provide a substantive way to rethink narratives and questions on identity. Every cooperative and each association, whether they're formal or not, because we can set that part aside, startups and collectives and whatever, right? Whether they're formal or not. Every cooperative and association is a site of practice. It's a space where everyday people are coming together to share power and to rebuild the commons. It's that third strategy, right? We're rebuilding the commons. Shining a light toward a greater understanding of cooperative economies is fundamental if we are to build a new world, one that is fair, just, and equitable. I think that's it. Thank you so much. Any of this. So we're doing that. We're like a proxy for your brain. We're gonna process in real time through conversation. So this is not a panel. This is more like the view. And so we're thinking together. We're rooting this in the work, so they'll introduce themselves in a moment and say a little bit about what they do, regionally, locally, up here, and then how some of the themes, like just like what's on your mind, what's landing on you, what did this bring up for you, what did this contribute to the. So we have, a little bit of time to just like integrate our thoughts. And it's very much decentering me, so I'm just here to like keep the conversation going, I guess. Do you want to start?
Thanks, Esteban. I'm Annie Doran. My primary livelihood is being the coordinating director of the Maine Food Convergence Project, which is the host of the Local Food Switchboard Project, which I'll probably center a lot on here, and also in a workshop in a little while with Alita, who's in the green vest over there. And should I talk about that? Or just introduce myself? So real brief, trying to keep it brief. The Local Food Switchboard is working to build, I love how there was a lot about small C cooperation and how it just like happens all the time. And the Local Food Switchboard it's a virtual food hub across the state of Maine. And we will be mapping 3 buckets, I like to say, of food-related things in Maine. One is the food businesses that produce food, harvesters, producers, value-added folks, etc. The second one, which I'm really excited about, is food infrastructure. So anything from storage to distribution to commercial kitchens, shared use kitchens, flash freezers, you name it. And the third is resources. Anything and everything that supports these food businesses. And what I'm really excited about is to be a catalyst for shifting the culture of how we work together, how we share our infrastructure, share our resources, and work together more. And maybe that will end up being big C cooperatives someday between folks, or maybe even the project in itself. Or maybe it'll stay small C, but a big part of this, especially the infrastructure part, is encouraging sharing of equipment, of resources from those who historically have had access to resources and capital to be owners, with folks who historically have not had access because of all the isms that exist and the injustices that exist. Anyway, I'll talk more about that later, but that's the big reason why I'm here. On the side, I consult with cooperatives, with organizations, a whole host of things.
That's awesome. And so my name is Scott Vaughn. I'm the director of the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy, and we're 12 years old, and 13 years ago, Annie was helping us organize our we didn't even know what we were going to call it at that point, so we go back and help on the Food Convergence Project. I guess what's coming up for me as this notion of the poly crisis and co-ops being poly solutions. When we started the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy, we ended up in the cooperative building. We're in the Fair Share Co-op building. We're in the commons. One of the first things that happened when we started thinking about the kind of economy we wanted to develop was, oh, of course it's going to need to be cooperative because everyone needs to be included in this. And one of the first events we had was Jonah Furtick from the Cooperative Development Institute came and talked about cooperative development with us. And since then we've really gone down that road. We've been working on 3 different cooperatives. One of them was to haul trash with bicycles because we're trying to decarbonize our transportation sector. We're trying to do more recycling in our community. That co-op kind of touched on a lot of those bases. We were trying to organize a housing co-op, but not any housing co-op, one that would be net zero. So it starts to look at solutions to the energy crisis while we're looking at the housing crisis. And then you guys heard from Tyler Adkins this morning about Maine Community Power Cooperative, which also is trying to support the local food system by giving money to, by supporting farmers with lease payments, but also creating opportunities to grow food on these sites because the way that we're developing it enhances the land's ability to grow food. So I think when we talk about the poly crisis, we need poly solutions, and that a lot of that comes from the cooperative, from the idea of cooperative enterprise.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be sitting up here in conversation with you. My name is Nora Goslin and I work at the Cooperative Development Institute. And I work in the sort of resident ownership communities program as the director of resident acquisitions. And real brief on that because definitely Esteban's presentation and comments brought up a lot around the idea of co-ops as naturally occurring. And it's kind of interesting to think about what are the dynamics that have intentionally kind of made them seem unnatural or difficult to accomplish. I think that was some of the things that was coming up and how we solve for that. But at CDI, Cooperative Development Institute, and here in Maine in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've had a huge undertaking around the opportunity to purchase law, which has made residents in mobile home parks get notice when their community is for sale. In the last month, we've had Herculean efforts that have been driven by residents to change that law into a right of first refusal, which is really the kind of gold standard of purchase laws like this. And personally, I'm very interested in their extension to multifamily housing, which I know is something that is, has roots here in Maine and has roots in other parts of New England, like in Massachusetts. And so through this opportunity to purchase law, I've had the opportunity in the last year to work on a number of resident purchases with some of the lenders in the room today that pulled that off, working with the residents and with technical assistance. And so again, just returning to like the idea of what your comments brought up, I think one of our efforts around the kind of market and the public policy idea of going in front of housing committees in the legislature to say co-ops are something that you know about. It's not, it's interesting to me this month in particular going to the housing committee in Augusta and explaining what a limited equity co-op is, when I know people know what a limited equity co-op is because I know they're hearing from other limited equity co-ops, and this sort of interesting, like, we go right to the articles, we say this is what it is, this is how it's, preservation in perpetuity, this is how affordability is baked in, and kind of, it's interesting to see people legislators wrap their heads around it as though this is something that isn't natural. And I mean, even that word is kind of interesting, but as though it's not something that already has a very, very long history. And it doesn't, why is a right of first refusal so kind of like constitutionally sits wrong with some people and this idea of private property? I just think all that having conversations about how co-ops intervene and how they've already done that and it's not something new is kind of was what you were bringing up for me. Can I give this back to someone?
I just comment on that briefly. I think it's because our government is sort of set up to look at the flow of capital and not so much centered around people. So when you look at a resident-owned community or a community of people living together, they're looking at it from a financial standpoint instead of the people that live there standpoint.
Yeah, we can just keep going. I mean, one of the things that I think I was trying to intervene on an idea that like co-ops are the solution. I'm like, they could be if you're being very specific about what the problem is. But if we're talking about one conversation we can have about cooperative businesses as something helpful, to me it wasn't about, there is no like ultimate thing that all co-ops solve other than like alienation or something, right? But that it's more, that's why the metaphor of the catalyst came up for me, because it's more about growing our ability, our capacity to have effective solutions that can be more local and more responsive and more tailored to different kinds of problems. And I think like just trying to make a little more space for some understanding of what it is we're doing is trying to build out the infrastructure, the ecosystem to do cooperatives, to do cooperation, that it puts us in a better position to then answer things. What I didn't say explicitly, and maybe I can say it now, depending on what comes up for you, is that like, I think nonprofits have been a really facile solution. Like I think that they were proffered as like, well, the government can only do so much, so we're gonna grow this $1 trillion industry of nonprofits, which is now being gutted. And then that will handle our last mile problem, where you'll have these like things that are not for profit, that are maybe tax deductible nonprofits, and they'll handle, you know, access to children's nutrition and housing for the whatever, all of the things. And so we as a society, whatever, this country cultivated a whole nonprofit sector. This didn't always exist like this. I mean, it really has been in really my lifetime, like since the 80s, that nonprofits grew to this $1 trillion thing. And I think the bubble has finally burst. We knew it wasn't sustainable. The critiques have been floating out there. So I was thinking like, well, right, what is kind of a, not only like a replacement, but what is a natural successor to that? And thinking about cooperatives as you know, democratic social enterprises that have proven track record and values, and that their purpose is not an idea. Their purpose is they only exist when there's a problem that they're solving for their members. And you know, where does that get us for the actual problems ultimately? So it was this different kind of argument around something that is more indirect, and that's where the strategy is like, we as movements should orient differently to not just, it's always A to B, but like, there's this middle step, like A to B to C, and co-ops are that middle part before you get to what the actual solutions are.
I think that really brings up what you're saying, a question around, I totally agree. I think that personally that there are fundamental shortcomings or things where the mantle can be taken up from where nonprofits will inherently leave off. And I think it's interesting also to think about that in terms of, we all commonly have heard technical assistance, like what makes co-ops work, right? In a lot of instances, not always, but it's definitely good to have technical assistance. And I think it's an interesting thing that comes up in the rock work, this idea that I don't have an answer for, but definitely think a lot about when you have nonprofits providing technical assistance and ways that having P6, right, cooperation among cooperatives and technical assistance where the providers have stakes in the mission or the efforts of the cooperative or similar efforts towards democratic management ownership. So I think that comes up a lot because I do think that, and we also see it in housing co-ops when folks will often get organized, really like activated because they're like, screw our landlord, let's replace our landlord. And then they become a co-op in our work as a conversion rather than a startup. And then it's like, we're the landlord. And that mindset when the common sort of like them goes away and then we're all looking at each other. And then having technical advising in place that understands and has gone through an experience where there is that type of shift you have to go through and think about, that's one for me.
I can just speak a little bit to the nonprofit piece. You know, we're a nonprofit. And I'll talk a little bit about Maine Community Power Cooperative. That cooperative we've been working on for 8 years. I mean, this is cooperative development, a very slow, long, patient process. But at this point, we're working with the state around policy. So the state's controlling the policy that makes our co-op possible. The federal government, we got a huge, $5 million grant from the federal government to start this co-op. We've already gotten half of the money, and maybe we'll see the other half, maybe we won't, the way things are going. We're working with local contractors, we're working with suppliers, we're working with, just a whole broad range of people and institutions to try to wrestle this thing into existence. That's just, takes a really long time and a lot of persistence. And I feel like, to your point, the nonprofit sector is vulnerable right now. So once this co-op gets up and has a life of its own, it is incorporated and it is taking on a life of its own. Then that comes back and supports the nonprofit that we're helping on some of the other pieces of it. So it's just a very complicated ecosystem that happens, I think, just to get one co-op off the ground.
This may be going on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important one. I've heard the word like infrastructure and technical assistance a lot and all this stuff. And there are so many benefits to cooperativizing, to being a part of a cooperative, or big C, small c, whatever. Thinking about the Raise Out Fair housing cooperative that I've been a part of, Spoke Folks that I've been a part of, Pedal People, Wild Mountain Cooperative. And I find so much joy in being part of that. And it's really challenging. It takes so much emotional effort, right, to be a part of cooperatives. A lot of conflict happens, a lot of confrontation. And this technical assistance, infrastructure that I hear about has to happen inside of us as well, right? And so I am always encouraging people to not just look at the actions and the building of infrastructure, but also do the work inside of us needed to understand our nervous systems, understand how we can engage more deeply with each other, or know when to say no, right? So that the infrastructure that is built, the services that are offered, the decisions that need to be made can be more effective. We can move more quickly. We can meet the challenges outside of our cooperative with more impact and more groundedness, and be able to make that cultural shift that enables real cooperation to succeed and to last for a long time.
Closing thoughts from you?
That was mine.
I've been on the other side of that with Annie. Have been involved with Annie helping us get to know each other, and whether the cooperative makes it or doesn't, some of the relationships that are formed and the kind of momentum that's built in the community is invaluable. Thank you.
Yeah, I really love your closing thoughts. I think that in the kind of rock world, I often say, like, not a lot of people want to see our face being like, now you have a decision. You have this private equity buyer, or you have this option to be a cooperative. It's a really tough starting position for a lot of groups that is kind of has a fundamental non-consensual trigger, because there's a multi-million-dollar offer that's been put in on their mobile home park, on their homes, and they now have a decision about going through this process. And I think it's really been incredible because of paths that have already been developed well before one community gets the sale notice, legislative advocacy paths that have been, paved, financial, CFNE, Bangor Savings, For Direct, like those relationships that we can, through a community effort, right, get a group at the pace that serves the community to the finish line. So just being able to say that, yes, right now in this moment, we have a need for moving quickly, but because all this stuff is already there and made, people have gone through this before, and you can tap into other resident leaders, other co-ops, other lenders and ecosystems. It's unlike any state that I personally have worked in and had the opportunity to, so that's a closing thought.
Cool, thanks. Thanks for being in dialogue. Thanks for doing the work that you each do. And I think I'm turning this to an MC like Ana Martina. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you're taking those words of inspiration and remembering the calls to action. At the end of the session, I'm going to ask you to remember that. So now